Thank you, everybody. If we could have a seat, we're about to begin. It's interesting, this meeting here today is to talk about new beginnings and foundations, but as I was preparing recently, it hit me that we need to talk about an ending. If you look at your watches right now, at this time, on this month, and on this day, Alexander Hamilton was just shot north of here, just after 8 o'clock. Why is it just after 8 o'clock? Daylight savings time. So, and Ben Franklin did not invent it at that time, so it actually is the time Alexander Hamilton was shot, just north of here in Weehawken. And we're going to be there tonight at 6 o'clock for a remembrance. So we welcome you up there at Hamilton Park at the Hamilton statue. And then Alexander Hamilton died 30 hours later at 2 p.m. on the 12th. And tomorrow at Hamilton's home in northern Manhattan, it's called Hamilton's Grange, there will be readings by the National Park Service. The 3 letters that Aaron Burr wrote back and forth, and Hamilton responded to those 3 letters. Those will all be read to end up at 2 o'clock at the time that Alexander Hamilton passed. 2 days later, on Monday the 14th, is when his body in the casket was carried from his brother and sister-in-law's home near City Hall, and we're going to retrace that route of that procession and end up at the same place, which is at Trinity Church. It's going to be augmented by participation of the Society of Cincinnati. How many people have heard of the Society of Cincinnati?
They were here.
Oh, they were here.
They were here.
Oh, fantastic. The New Jersey branch?
I think the whole big shebang was here.
Okay, terrific. Well, we're going to
And
have...
it was founded here.
Almost.
Well, they say it was founded here.
Okay. We're going to have the president of the New York chapter.
All right.
Peter Dodge is going to speak because they coordinated the funeral service and ended up there. The U.S. Coast Guard just committed to presenting the colors, singing the national anthem at his graveside, and we'll be playing taps. Most people don't know about that. We did not advertise that. So that's a new thing. So that's the end of Alexander Hamilton's life. Let's get back to why we're here. And this is Celebrate Hamilton 2014. Some people focus on the duel and the death. We focus on what did he do for our nation. So that's the focus. We have 16 events. Who did not get a program flyer today? Mayor, did you get one? A flyer for today? Cindy?
Is that this?
That's it. Okay, he's got it. So the theme here in Elizabethtown, which got us very excited, was that this is where Alexander Hamilton's life started. So young immigrant Alexander Hamilton. And we have some of our board members here. If you could raise your hand from the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society, or the AHA Society, or for short, AHA. So you can pick your form of that. Then we found these 3 sites that all were critical to Hamilton's welcome here and preparing him to be able to contribute in such a way. Right here is where it began. So first, I'll give a more formal introduction, but Bob Higgs from the First Presbyterian Church in the Academy where Hamilton went to school, prep school. Then we have Kathy. Where's Kathy? Kathy in the back. Kathy Craig from Lives Blue Nose Home, Boxwood Hall, and Bill. If you could, Bill Schroe from Liberty Hall. Also, Hamilton was with the Livingston, so we will continue to do that. The Vice President and I came here a few weeks ago because we were focused on the Academy. And yeah, we want to stop by and see Boxwood Hall for a little bit and get ready. We had 45 minutes, 15 minutes to get to the next place. That seemed sufficient from what we thought, but boy, were we found to be incorrect in that understanding. First we were with Kathy, and I was supposed to be meeting with Bob, and it was like, oh, there's so much fascinating information, I can't imagine it. Oh my goodness, Bob, I'm sorry, would you like to come talk with Bob? And he shared what you're going to hear now, and we felt people need to hear this story. So much found it right here on the spot. It's just very inspirational. So we went from 45 minutes each to an hour and a half, and we're very inspired, and we're glad that this is being recorded. And what we would like to do is more people to continue to come and see where many things started, and I'd like to turn it over for more introductions to Bob Higgs.
Thank you, Rand, and thank you for being here. We are glad that you made it on a 9 o'clock beautiful day, and a very absent of humidity, which we're quite glad about. I'd like to acknowledge among our guests here the mayor of the city of Elizabeth, Chris Bolwich, and Gordon Haas, the director of the Greater Elizabeth Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much for being with us. And also Charlie Shawcross, the head of the Union County Historical Society, is with us. Well, today we are going to take a little trip discussing the founding of New Jersey and the way it shaped Alexander Hamilton to be the man that we know as a principal founder of our country and a major influence on many of the institutions that we take for granted. We're going to discuss how New Jersey started and the milieu in which he came into when he arrived in Elizabeth in 1772. So our presentation today is going to talk about these things and how we got started here in New Jersey on this, our 350th anniversary year. So, let's talk about New Jersey, 1664, the year we begin. Why 1664? Because on June 24th, just 2 weeks ago, we commemorated the birthday of New Jersey because that was the day King Charles II gave a royal charter to Lords Carteret and Berkeley, giving them permission to settle the land that was located east of the Delaware River. Why did he do that? Well, because King Charles II had recently ascended to the throne of England after a period of civil war. There was a major civil war in England which resulted in the death and beheading of his father, Charles I, in 1650, and was replaced by a 10-year span called the Commonwealth under the leadership of a man named Oliver Cromwell. The Commonwealth was not terribly popular. It was led, Cromwell was what was called a Puritan, and he wasn't very fun. He did things like ban Christmas and dancing, and people got pretty much tired of his Commonwealth thing, and Charles II came back promising fun. In fact, he was known as the Merry Monarch when he reascended to the throne, because he said, hey, we're all back, let's have a party. But he accumulated some debt in terms of getting back onto the throne, and he owed debt to a guy named William Penn, so he gave him a chunk of land called Pennsylvania, and he owed some money to folks named Carteret and Berkeley, and gave them this land east of the Delaware River. It so happened that Carteret was a native of the Isle of Jersey, a small island located in the English Channel. And so in honor of his home, he requested that the new land be called New Jersey. They also thought of naming it New Nova Caesarea, but that doesn't roll off the tongue like New Jersey does. So what happens is that they arrive. This land is given in June 24th, the first charter is created. At the same time, however, and this, I think, marks what makes New Jersey distinct and has colored our politics from day one, the same land was being given to a different group of people. Aha! See, Charles II had a brother named James, and he would later become King James II. But during this time, he was Vice Lord of the Admiralty. And to secure their possessions and to make money for England, they thought it was a good idea to start expanding their colonies in the New World. At this time, the two main British colonies were located in Virginia and Massachusetts. All the land in between was unclaimed or unoccupied, at least by English standards. There was this place called New Amsterdam in between, which was owned by the Dutch. And so James II, or James the Admiral, sent an expedition over from England to take New Amsterdam from the Dutch and name it and claim it in the name of England. James also had the title Duke of York. And so he sent this expedition over under the command of a man named Richard Nichols. Colonel Nichols seized New Amsterdam from Peter Stuyvesant in 1664, and Stuyvesant abandoned the claim of the Dutch. Nichols comes over, renames New Amsterdam New York, and that's where New York comes from. Ta-da! Stationed off New York on Long Island was a man named John Ogden. Ogden was a Massachusetts farmer who had emigrated from England about 20 years previously, and like many people in Massachusetts, thinking they were going to be great farmers there, decided the soil was lousy, the weather was bad, and he wanted to do his business elsewhere. Well, he sees Nichols come into New York, take over, and he comes up to him and says, "Colonel Nichols, how would you like some help settling your new land south of the Hudson River?" And Colonel Nichols says, "Of course I would," and promptly writes him a note saying, "You have the right to negotiate with the local Lenape Indian tribe for land." And that is exactly what happened. John Ogden comes, negotiates with the Lenape Indians right here, and obtains permission or a treaty from them to get all the land from the Delaware River east and north of the Raritan and south of the Passaic. So simultaneously, two groups have title to the land, equal valid title. The people that the king gave, Carteret and Berkeley, and the people Nichols gave under John Ogden. This is really the start of a contentious period in New Jersey, founded in dispute. Now I want to take a moment and discuss why here, why this place, why Elizabethtown. Because when Ogden came, he chose this very spot on which to build the first meeting house for his group. The meeting house functioned as the public building. Everything took place there. And in 1664 onwards, not only was the building used as a meeting house, it was used as a school, it was used as a church, it was used as the office for the governor, and it was also used as a place where the very first New Jersey legislature met in 1668. The legislature, which the mayor has invited to come back and meet here again this year to honor our 350th anniversary. And we certainly hope that they'll be saying yes and coming to visit us probably in September if it all works out. But why here? Well, this is an outstanding location. If you're going to build a fort or some sort of headquarters. Why? Well, we are a mile from the Arthur Kill, which leads into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, back in Ogden's day, the Elizabeth River, which is just over here and is being splendidly redeveloped by Groundwork Elizabeth as a nature and walking trail, well, it used to be navigable wide enough to get ocean-going ships all the way over to where our library and courthouse are. And so this place was high enough to avoid flooding. It was navigable, easily defended, and the Elizabeth River continues, and back in the day, it probably continued all the way to present-day Orange. And so it was an ideal place for farmers to put their fields and float their crops down to this area where they'd be loaded on spot where New Jersey began, and the founders of New Jersey are literally buried under your feet. This building has no basement, and when the meeting house was torn down in 1720 and replaced with a church-style building, they didn't put a basement there to honor the folks who were buried underneath us. And this building, which was built in 1790, continued that tradition. So we are sitting on the founders of New Jersey, and these are some of the names that you might associate with the founding of New Jersey. John Ogden being first. And this is the Bible that John Ogden brought with him from England when he immigrated in the 1640s. This Bible is a Geneva Bible, we'll be talking about that later, and it was printed sometime in the early 1600s. The date of the Bible says 1599, probably a little later after that. But he brought this Bible with him, and through a lot of circumstances, we got it back and had it restored, and it's here for you to look at and enjoy. But it's this Bible that now will shift to be the focus of our story. You can see some of the names up here are found all over our region, and people, these names are found on schools and roads and streets all over the place. Some of the others that you might be familiar with, the Crane family, well, the town of Cranford is named after them. The Hetfields, there's tons of Hetfield streets all over the place. The Dayton family contributed 2 generals, and Dayton, Ohio, among other things. This afternoon I'm having Representative Winans family come here and meet with him. So let's talk about this Bible and its significance. We've got to keep in mind that in this day and age when religion does not play a major role in people's lives, in many people's lives, or they don't take it as seriously as they used to, back then religion was taken extremely seriously. And the role of the pastors could not be underestimated. Most homes, if they had a book, the only book they would have would be a Bible. Church services were typically held twice on Sunday, and they were 2 hours in length, and sermons went for 40 minutes or an hour. I'd be killed if I did that today, but that's the way it is. And so the church and the pastors had an enormous influence on people and how they thought and how they considered life. This Bible is called a Geneva Bible, not a King James Bible. And this is very important because the Geneva Bible, like all Bibles, had its own point of view. And it was translated by followers of John Calvin in the Presbyterian tradition. Moreover, it was translated, and if you come up here and look at the Bible, it is covered in the margins with commentary. So not only is the scripture there in English, but a particular style of interpretation is with it as well. And the interpretation that goes with this Bible is strongly Calvinist, Reformed in tone. What does that mean? It means that it followed the Presbyterian way of government. I don't know how familiar you are with the Presbyterian Church, but in terms of its government, in terms of its history, it is very democratic. In other words, it is a bottom-up system. Presbyterian churches are governed by groups called sessions, who are elected by the people. The minister is elected and chosen by the people. It's not a top-down system like you find in the Roman Catholic or Anglican tradition where there is one person in charge who appoints bishops, who in turn appoints priests over the people. The Presbyterian system is bottom up. And this is very important in terms of shaping people's ideas, in terms of who they are and what they can do. So this Geneva Bible is written in a way that says the people should be in control as much as possible. For example, in the Bible, the word for king is translated as tyrant in the Old Testament. And you can imagine that if you're a king, you probably wouldn't like this Bible too much. Well, that's how King James I thought. And when he took the throne, he ordered this Bible to be burned. He ordered it seized and burned and did not want it read, and he authorized a new translation which we now call the King James Version of the Bible. And in the King James Version of the Bible, the word king is not translated as tyrant, it is translated as sovereign. So you can imagine that this Bible had a great deal of influence on the people who would read it. This Geneva Bible was the Bible not only of John Ogden, it was the Bible of the Pilgrims. It was the Bible of the Puritans. It was the Bible of Presbyterians. And so this was how people were trained to think about situations. That's why it's so important. Now, in theology, we've talked about some of the aspects of the theology of the Bible, and theology influences settlement patterns in the New World. Massachusetts, Pilgrims, Puritans, Calvinists, Geneva Bible. Virginia, on the other hand, was settled by folks associated more with the Church of England, top down. What was New Jersey going to be? What was New Jersey going to be? That's the question. New Jersey begins in 1664 with two models to choose from. The Massachusetts way of doing things, small holdings, small farmers, democratic tradition, democratic town meetings, or a Virginia way of doing things, large landed estates. How is it going to happen here? Well, as we saw before, New Jersey was founded in controversy. This very land was given to two groups of people at the same time. Carteret and Berkeley, from the nobility, believed in a tradition of large land ownership. They would be happy to divide New Jersey into big estates to give to fellow nobles who would in turn break it down to regular folks. John Ogden, on the other hand, in New England, he believed in a system of selling the land in what he called freeholdings. In New Jersey, the leaders of the county government are called freeholders. That's where that comes from. The board of chosen freeholders were the people, the freeholders of the freeholdings that were sold to create a bunch of small farms up and down. So the philosophy was that anybody who could get here could probably afford the amount for 100 acres of land or so, which they would put along the Elizabeth River and start being farmers. And this is the heart of the dispute coming along. So let's summarize here. Ogden, his Bible, his philosophy versus the nobility. Richard Nichols captures New Amsterdam in 1664, gives Ogden the right to negotiate for this land. So they move in, they start building New Jersey. At the same time, the Duke of York sent this expedition. At the same time, Carteret and Berkeley have titled the land. In 1665, they send their nephew Philip Carteret here to be the governor of this area. And so Philip Carteret is considered the first governor of New York, and we can say the founding of Elizabeth City dates from 1665, not 1664, because that is when official government was instituted in this area. However, Philip Carteret was no dummy. He arrived, and there's a painting in Newark showing John Ogden greeting Philip Carteret as he steps off the boat. And I think there's a look on Ogden's face saying, "Who are you, and what are you going to do here?" Well, Carteret was no dummy. He appointed Ogden to be essentially justice of the peace and gave him authority to do everything, because it was just Carteret versus everybody else. And he said, "Well, discretion being the better part of valor, I'm going to let you continue to run this place." But they didn't get along. And the disputes between the nobility versus the common folk represented by Ogden keeps continuing. In fact, the Dutch tried to return. Just a few years later, in the 1670s, the Dutch came back. And Ogden, being a practical man, raised his hand and says, "I now support the King of Netherlands," and he was appointed the governor, or shout, of the region. Unfortunately, the Dutch changed their mind, or the English came back, drove the Dutch out. But the point is that this kind of sealed the idea that New Jersey was going to be not built on the Virginia model, but on the New England model. Small farms, bottom up, and people very much for representative style democracy. The Reformed theology as reflected in this Geneva Bible. I think that this dispute helps explain why New Jersey, despite our large population, is so divided into small cities and towns. We have a town and we have a township almost all over the state. From the beginning, there is a suspicion of power, of bigness, of all the things that a large system like England and a top-down monarchy represents. You can say whether or not our very scattered and diverse system of New Jersey works or not, but that's the way it is. And our municipalities sometimes get along, sometimes they don't. But you wonder why? Well, this is where it really begins. So, this is the milieu into which Hamilton is coming into. This suspicious, contentious idea of small holdings versus large estates. And by 1750, Elizabethtown has been reduced to an area roughly what Union County is today. And you can't see the map very well, but it shows that many of the towns that are in Union County today are still here under different names. For example, this map shows a place called Turkey, and Turkey is now called New Providence. There's a place called Spanktown, which is called Rahway. There's a place called Dog Corners, and we call that Clark. So, and Crane's Ford is now just plain Cranford. I guess they got tired of saying both of them together. So now let's shift gear into the founding of our country with the interplay of theology and politics all starting to come together, and people taking all this stuff extremely seriously. And Ogden's Bible and the theology represented very much coloring people's ideas. New Jersey became a colony, an official colony of England in 1706. Before that time, it was owned by Carteret and Berkeley. And all the contention between Carteret and Berkeley and Ogden and his faction over who was going to manage the land, well, they gave up. Carteret and Berkeley said, we're tired of this. We're tired of this. England, you take over. In 1706, they did. And that's when a loyal governor began to rule New Jersey and New York. In the beginning, both New Jersey and New York were ruled by one person, and as New Jersey got bigger, they separated it into two governorships. But more and more, we see the dispute growing between the establishment and the dissenters. The storm begins to gather. One of the interesting things that happened was that in 1719, the book in which all the deeds of Elizabethtown recorded in, the deeds that created all those freeholdings in the area, that book disappeared. Or didn't. Or was it just stolen or hidden somewhere? Well, the opportunity was there for proprietors to get the land back. And they almost succeeded, except everybody came together over the course of 10 years, from 1719 to 1729, and recreated the book with all the land deeds. And I believe that book, the 1729 book, is still a legal document, a basis for land, tracing land holdings back today. But the point is that a bad taste is left in the people's mouths about who's going to get the land, who's going to use the land, who has the right to the land. And things start going south after 1750, once the French Indian War starts coming in, and the British start wanting money, protection money, for having defended the colonies during the war. More and more suspicion. And then this man arrives on the scene, Reverend James Caldwell. Caldwell was a Virginian, trained in Princeton, and came here as pastor in 1762. And he is very much caught up in this revolutionary fever, the ideas of Calvinism and democracy, and a staunch opposition to the Church of England and top-down rule. He becomes pastor of this church in 1762, and right after that marries a woman named Hannah Ogden Caldwell, a direct descendant of John Ogden's. He's no dummy. But as pastor of the First Church, the largest church in the region, he has an area to cover because these guys, these pastors, traveled a great deal on horses. People couldn't come to church, so church came to them. And so he would spend a great deal of time riding as much as 20, 30 miles away to preach, to do the sacraments, to do burials, pastoral care, and such like that. So this guy had plenty of opportunity to go throughout the New Jersey countryside and talk about this interpretation of the Bible. And the big concern of the people was that everyone grew up thinking this. We were taught that God put kings on the throne. And therefore to oppose the king would be the same as opposing God. And in the Geneva Bible and the theology of Caldwell and the Presbyterians, they pointed to all the Old Testament passages where there were bad kings of Israel. Bad kings who were removed by God. And so they could say, no, look, when there was a bad king, read all these passages where God is condemning bad kings and says, you will suffer the consequences for being bad. You'll be killed, you'll be removed, whatever. Therefore, God does not force us to put up with bad kings, A story is told that here at First Church, right across the street, is St. John's Episcopal Church. And St. John's started in 1706 when New Jersey became an official crown colony. And the story is told that Reverend Caldwell would not talk to the rector of St. John's. In fact, if they saw each other on Broad Street out there, one or the other would cross to the other side of the street to avoid having anything to do with each other. So here we are. All these elements, the Ogden Bible with Reformed theology, representational form of government, mistrust of central authority, and the idea of electing your own officers, your own leaders. Emphasis on grace, as God's grace is that you live life as a response to God's grace and favor, and that the king himself is also subject to God's law. The people may remove the king. This is the world that Alexander Hamilton walks into. Yes?
If I could just intersect just
Sure.
for a moment to tell about how Hamilton, what happened before he got to this point.
Okay, sure.
Thanks. Just to give you a sense of where Hamilton came from when he actually showed up here as an immigrant. He was born January 11, 1757. There's another important gentleman here, Michael E. Newton, if you could raise your hand. He's brought a lot of joy to Hamiltonians, that he's been sorting out all these various propagated myths about Hamilton, and he's been working so hard to get to the truth, and he's up through 1781, which covers this period of time. So I'm trying to represent some of the information that will be coming out in his book in the next year or so. And so he was born January 11th, 1757 to Rachel Fawcett, who was from, who knows where Alexander Hamilton was born? Nevis in the Caribbean, small islands, St. Kitts and Nevis. And his father, James Hamilton, was the fourth son of a Scottish laird. And so they had Alexander Hamilton, 1757. They moved to St. Croix in 1765. His father left him at the beginning of 1766. And his mother, a little over a year later, died. The cousin caretaker for the two brothers committed suicide, and so Alexander Hamilton, at a very young age, had to fend for himself, pull himself up by the bootstraps, and he worked in Kruger, Beekman, and Courtright merchant exchange business in St. Croix. Remember, the Caribbean was where international trade was. You know, the Dutch, the Spanish, the British, the French, the Danish, Dutch, yes. And so that's where Alexander Hamilton got a little insight, and they recognized some of his special capabilities. And then there was a Presbyterian minister that comes into play. So thanks, Bob.
A Presbyterian minister by the name of Hugh Knox, who happened to be a classmate of a man named James Caldwell. They went to Princeton together. And apparently in the 1770s, St. Croix was hit with a hurricane. And young Alexander wrote a moving poem about the hurricane, which was published in the local newspaper. And the local businessman said, "This guy's a genius, he needs further education. Is there anything you can do for us, Reverend Knox?" And so Reverend Knox writes James Caldwell and says, "I have this brilliant kid who needs a secondary education, anything you can do to help him." And Reverend Knox says, or Reverend Caldwell says, "Well, it so happens that at my church we have an academy which trains people to go to college. In fact, the academy building over there, the third building to sit on that site, was the site of the building that trained Hamilton and a guy named Burr previously, but was intended as a prep school for college. And so Caldwell said, if you can raise the tuition, send him here, we will take care of him." and take care of him we did. Because he was not only under the care of Reverend Caldwell as one of his teachers, he got to stay in Boxwood Hall under the care of Elizabethtown. And he got to go to church with not only Boutonneau, but William Livingston, who lived in Liberty Hall. And so from a young age, Hamilton, as a worshiper in this congregation, a student in the academy, and exposed to some of the leading minds of the time, very quickly found that he was caught up in the movements moving and leading toward independence. So here is young Hamilton, surrounded in New Jersey, in Elizabeth, which would later be the hotbed of the Revolution, and meeting all these people who would be so influential in his future life. Hamilton, by the way, wanted to go to Princeton just like Caldwell did, and he wrote the president of Princeton, John Witherspoon, because he wanted to go on an accelerated course. He wanted to do the course of study in, I believe, 3 years instead of 4. But Witherspoon wrote him back and said, no, you can't do that. We had a young man here try to do that, and he ruined his health. That young man who ruined his health was James Madison. And so that's why Hamilton ended up going to King's College, which we now call Columbia. So here is the Hamilton story, and you're going to be exposed to it later on at Liberty Hall and at Boxwood Hall. Member of this church, exposed to leaders of New Jersey, other people who were members of this congregation, through Abraham Clark, Jonathan Dayton, people who led the revolution and kept it going in New Jersey. Elias Boutonneau, as we mentioned, William Livingston. And so they knew him, and when George Washington was looking for someone to help him, Hamilton already established himself early in the war by raising his own regiment. But these men, who were close associates of Washington, Livingston, Boutonneau, Caldwell, Clark, etc., they could stand up and say, Alexander Hamilton is who you want to be your aide, because he's smart, he can fight, he knows what he's doing. All these things come together, influenced by the theology, the politics, the history, to shape young Alexander Hamilton and lead him on to the greatness that he would give to our country for the rest of his service. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Now you can understand why we were so inspired to understand, wow, New Jersey, founded right here. We heard about New Jersey 350 right here 350 years ago. It's amazing. And then the leaders and the different thinking from the top down. Here's where the bottom up. This is what Alexander Hamilton, espoused and grabbed his arms out. Of course, he came from the British West Indies, so he had a natural allegiance to the British. But so this thought leadership here in Elizabethtown really made a difference. One interesting story to add to this is Francis Barber, who was the headmaster over here. It was interesting. The big battle where Alexander Hamilton was a hero was the Battle of Yorktown. And Francis Barber served under Alexander Hamilton in the Revolutionary War, so that was interesting. But one of the sad stories about our dear Francis Barber is that near the end of the war up in New Windsor, near Newburgh, New York, a tree fell on him and killed him. So he made it through the Revolutionary War, and a tree took this gracious man. So that was that. Now I guess we'll head out. Some questions?
A few questions, but before we go to the questions, we have some swag for you. First of all, from the Chamber of Commerce, we have the official Elizabethtown 350 bag, and we have them here for you, and they contain all kinds of information about our town and our region and why we think we're so wonderful, because we are. And this is a go guide of dining and great things to see and do in our city, and a magazine that talks about Elizabeth and all the wonderful things in our region. We also have for you a copy of today's presentation with some notes. You can take one of those. This is a brochure about the cemetery and some of the folks mentioned in it. And for those who are interested, for sale, this is a book about the history of First Church called The Church of the Founders of New Jersey. It goes back to the beginning to 1964. This is available for sale. And we also have pins, 350 pins available for sale. They're $5 each and available as well. So please help yourself get to know our town, our city. We're glad you're here. We hope you'll spend some time, and we certainly hope you will come back and learn more about the legacy of Hamilton and the founding of New Jersey, and really what makes this place so important. And my editorial comment is that we don't do a good enough job here in New Jersey telling the world about the significance of our contribution, and so I hope that the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society will help spread the word and say, hey, yeah, you all know about Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and New York, but New Jersey is really where it happened.
On behalf of the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society, we would like to thank Bob Higgs. And I just wanted to make mention, I asked him how he would like to be respectfully spoken of, and he said Bob is, so I'm not being disrespectful, I call him Reverend, because he's the historical leader here, he's a community leader here, he's a spiritual leader here, he's inspired us, and this message can inspire a lot of people. New Jersey started here. The U.S. new thinking to emerge from underneath the traditional top-down started here. And Alexander Hamilton, who you should be really proud of, is a founding father that you can claim. You know, so there's a lot to be proud of. So we want to thank you with this certificate of gratitude. Any questions for either about the church or
Oh boy.
I may have missed this because I was late coming in, but what year was the church built and how much of the interior is original?
Well, this is the third building to be on this location. The founders under Ogden built a meeting house, a typical New England style meeting house in 1664 when they arrived. That meeting house lasted until about 1722 when they tore it down and built a more traditional church style building. It was from that building that Princeton University began under the pastor of Jonathan Dickinson, started what we call the College of New Jersey, and that evolved into Princeton University. Then the British actually burned that church down in 1780, and well, it wasn't actually the British, it was some wayward children. They had field boys. Their father was an elder in this congregation, and the sons, you know, the revolution polarized a lot of families. So the sons were loyalists, and they burned down the church in 1780. They're buried right over there. So I guess at some point things were made up. But Dad was so embarrassed that he gave the church's barn for the church to meet in for 10 years while they were getting things together. And in 1790, this building was erected. And this building, the walls are original. We suffered a major fire here in 1946, which gutted the interior and the roof. All that was standing was the walls and the part of the bell tower. And when they rebuilt it in 46, they resolved to try to make it look like we think it did in 1790. So all the architectural research went into saying, this is what we think the church looked like, or this is a Georgian-style church of 1790 with the clear windows, with the two-level balcony. The second level, you may know, was typically used for slaves and foreigners, and that's where they would be escorted to. The doors are because back in the day there was no central heating, so during the winter time people would come to church with metal boxes of live coals and set them underneath the pews and close the doors to keep the heat in. The wood partition between the pews was because the pews were sold and rented to parishioners in blocks. And so the way the church was financed in those days is that a family would rent a pew for a year, and they would have the right to sit in that place. And woe betide anyone who sat in the place that somebody else rented, because they would be shown the door. Not terribly Christian, but that's how they did it in those days. So what we have here is as original as we can get, and as I said, the founders are still underfoot.
Just one other fascinating story you told me about was the New Jersey flag.
Oh yes, or not the New Jersey flag, the seal of Union County.
Sorry, the seal of Union
The seal of Union County. If you take a look at the seal of Union County, call that up, you will see that it depicts a log cabin and a woman holding her hands up and a British soldier taking aim at her. Well, that woman is Hannah Caldwell. Hannah was the wife of the pastor of this church, James Caldwell, and she died at Connecticut Farms, about 5 miles from here, during that battle in early June 1780. And her death incensed the people, because it was the wife of the pastor, and encouraged them to rally and help gather to defeat the British at the Battle of Springfield later that month. The Battle of Springfield is significant because it was the last time combined British, Hessian, and Loyalist forces tried to get George Washington in Morristown. And that defeat of the British bought time for the French to finally get here and help seal the victory. The Battle of Springfield is another aspect of New Jersey history which we don't talk about at all. If you go to Springfield, you'll see there's a sign saying Springfield, home of the forgotten victory. But that's all I say. One of the events that we invite you back here for is 4 Centuries in the Weekend during October 18th and 19th. All of Union County will be open. Every single historical site we've got here will be open, and you can just soak yourself up in our history and see why so much history has taken place here in Union County. One of the things that will be happening is that we'll have reenactments that weekend. On Saturday, we will be reenacting the Battle of Springfield and the Battle of Connecticut Farms. We expect to have over 200 British and Patriot reenactors coming here to reenact those battles. And then on Sunday, they will gather just down the street here at Union Square and march up Elizabeth Avenue to First Church. They will pretend to burn First Church down again. And then they'll move on to Liberty Hall, where they will search for Governor Livingston and not find him, because Governor Livingston didn't spend much time at Liberty Hall during the war. They were always trying to get him for some reason. But it will be a major, major time, very exciting, and we invite you to spread the word about 4 Centuries in the Weekend, because every year we have 4 Centuries, a huge, huge event, and where we show off the fact that so much of New Jersey history started and happened here. Mr. Mayor? Nope, you're...
I enjoyed it.
Oh, you're great!